Before I begin, I must address a cordial greeting to all the people who are listening at this moment. It is necessary to highlight that both this podcast, the YouTube channel, the website, as well as our publications on other platforms, its main objective is to communicate the vision of the Association of World Citizens. But now you may wonder, what is the Association of World Citizens? The Association of World Citizens, AWC, is a global movement of people who fully participate in generating proposals in order to contribute to the solution of various problems around the world. How to resolve armed conflicts, promotion and protection of human rights, development ecological sustainable, and the creation of a vision of a global, cosmopolitan and humanistic society. As expected, the Association of World Citizens is a non-governmental organization which has consultative status with the United Nations, which qualifies so that their proposals can be taken into consideration. The Association of World Citizens is currently chaired by Mr. René Wadlow, who graduated from Princeton University in the special program in European Civilization, Sociology, Political Science, and has a master's degree in International Relations from the University of Chicago. Mr. René Wadlow, before being president of the Association of World Citizens, served as an advisor to the Ministry of Education, and later he was a professor and research director at the Graduate Institute of Development Studies in Geneva, Switzerland, where he draws on his knowledge and experiences to give us his vision on issues of great importance in our society. And one of these articles is titled Transformation of Populism in Europe and the Americas, History and Recent Trends. And revolving around this article is that we developed this episode 1 of this podcast. But before delving into this article, we must make it clear, what is populism? Populism is a model of democratic government that seeks to take popular measures to gain the sympathy of the population, even at the cost of taking measures contrary to the democratic state, or that could harm the country and its population in the medium or long term. Example, excess subsidies over indebtedness, uncontrolled public works policy, among others. But populism does not come alone, because it requires a fundamental ingredient, which is nationalism. Nationalism is an ideology that promotes the identity and unity of a nation, emphasizing its culture, history and traditions. In fact, it is difficult to imagine a populist government that does not rely on nationalism to stoke the pride, fear and fury they use to maintain power. But fear and fury of what? You will wonder. Simply put, populist governments need to sell a story of good guys versus bad guys, where they are the defenders and martyrs who fight against external or internal enemies, who want to take away the country's wealth at any price. That is, the population must be sure that all their problems and shortcomings are the fault of the country's enemies, and in turn, feel grateful that their government is doing everything it can to protect them. Millions of inhabitants live under this type of government today, where we see leaders who preach love, justice and prosperity, while the inhabitants of the countries they govern emigrate in large waves to seek a bit of quality of life in more developed countries. It is in this context that various universities have carried out studies in order to understand and explain this political social phenomenon. Among many studies carried out, in this podcast we are going to highlight one that has been carried out by the University of Buffalo, located in New York, United States. It is necessary to highlight that this university has great prestige and a history of more than 150 years. The teachers who contributed their knowledge and experiences to this study were the following: John Abromite, Maria Bridget Chesterton, Gary Maratta, and York Norman. John Abromite. He's a professor of history at the University at Buffalo, specializing in the history of European political and social thought. Maria Bridget Chesterton. She is a British writer and journalist. And the teacher, Gary Maratta. officially retired from teaching at SUNY Buffalo State, effective December 31, 2012. And last but not least, York Norman. He holds a Ph.D. from Georgetown Ottoman University, and he is a specialist in Turkish political history, the Middle East, and Eastern Europe. These excellent academic specialists are the co-authors of a work called Transformation of Populism in Europe and the Americas, Recent History and Trends. It is quite interesting, because in this work, important aspects are highlighted over other studies regarding populism, among which the book by Imagined Communities stands out, by British historian Benedict Anderson. In this work, the writer carries out an analysis of 4 stages in history, in which populism stood out as a social and political phenomenon. In his first analysis, he points out the rise of Hitler and the Nazis during the Weimar Republic. As a second analysis, he cites populism as identity for propositions about Peronism. In a third analysis, radical right populist parties in today's Europe. And as a fourth and final analysis, it refers to non-governmental organizations and national heroes, following the order of ideas. On December 12, 2015, British historian Benedict Anderson died, author of the widely cited 1983 book, Imagined Communities. In this influential study of nationalism, he observed nationalism as a possible imaginative process that allows one to feel solidarity with strangers, and for this he wrote the following: in a time when it is so common that progressive and cosmopolitan intellectuals, particularly in Europe, they insist on the almost pathological character of nationalism, its roots in fear and hatred of the other, of their affinities with racism, it is useful to remind ourselves that nations inspire love and, often, a deeply sacrificial love. The cultural products of nationalism, poetry, prose fiction, music, plastic arts, show this love very clearly in thousands of different shapes and styles. However, as a cosmopolitan intellectual, observing reactions to the flow of immigrants and refugees to Europe, and to the results of some recent elections, with a strong increase in populist nationalism, he is among those who emphasize the almost pathological character of nationalism. The longest section of the book is devoted to how scholars, they analyze the rise of Hitler and the Nazis during the Weimar Republic. Although nationalist sentiments and Stachelhelm predated Hitler and the small group around him were able to mobilize the periphery against the center, even the conservative center, and thus give a voice to those who were excluded from a significant role in German political life. However, as Larry Jones points out, he points out in his contribution that one should not lose sight of the fact that the Nazi attack on the Weimar Republic was not a movement that somehow arose spontaneously from the frustration, difficulties and suffering of those who made up German society, who had been marginalized by the German political and economic course development since the beginning of the First World War, who had been marginalized by the German political and economic course development since the beginning of the First World War, but a highly centralized and carefully controlled campaign that depended on a partisan organization with an iron discipline that left little autonomy or capacity for spontaneity. Now you will wonder, who was or who is Larry Jones? Larry Jones is a retired chemist, dedicated to promoting humanistic thought. He is the founder and former president of the Institute of Humanist Studies, also founder of the Secular Coalition for America, and he has been involved in many other humanist organizations. It is necessary to make a small parenthesis and tell them that if you are finding this podcast educational and interesting, I invite you to subscribe to this channel, like it and activate the notification bell so that YouTube keeps you up to date with our new content. In turn, it helps us share this information with more people. Continuing with the podcast, we can highlight that Juan Domingo Perón, who came to power in 1943 in Argentina, he consciously incorporated many of the Nazi techniques and symbols. However, as Matthew Karish points out, Matthew Karish received his Ph.D. from the University of Chicago and is a professor of world history and modern Latin American history and culture in Argentina of the 20th century. Him in his chapter, Populism as Identity, for propositions about Peronism, states that Juan Domingo Perón obtained the support of a fairly large group of people, which made his populism a specific and consistent ideology. While Perón and similar Latin American leaders were not Democrats, they also did not have the ability to kill those with different ideas on the scale of the Nazis. Therefore, as Casmud points out, Casmud in his analysis of radical right populist parties in Europe today, radical right-wing populist parties share a central ideology that combines at least three characteristics. 1. Nativism. 2. Authoritarianism. 3. Populism. 1. Nativism implies a combination of nationalism and xenophobia, an ideology that maintains that a state should be exclusively inhabited by members of the nation and that alien elements, whether people or ideas, they are fundamentally threatening to the homogeneous nation-state. Radical right populist parties are experiencing their greatest electoral and political success in post-war Europe, but fortunately, neither Marine Le Pen, the current deputy of the National Assembly for the 11th electoral district of the Pas-de-Calais department of France, nor the leader of the Party for Freedom, Geert Wilders, leader of a nationalist and populist right-wing political party in the Netherlands, they are not Adolf Hitler. Therefore, thanks to democratic models, there is a crucial role for cosmopolitan intellectuals. Right-wing populist parties play with the loss of confidence in the main political parties, as well as officials of the European Union. We have little influence on the way the main political parties operate, and even less influence on the European Union Secretariat. Therefore, the role is to develop a strong civil society, walls of non-governmental organizations protecting human rights, and creatively try to generate new proposals to help migrants and refugees. Our role is not only to defend, but also to counterattack. We need to develop our cosmopolitan spirit more strongly. It is necessary to develop figures that counteract the myths of national heroes. We need to emphasize the unity of humanity, as opposed to national ethnic identities. We must take current populist nationalist efforts seriously and develop an organized response. As we mentioned before, the author of this article was Murdoch René Wadlow, President, Association of World Citizens. If you found this podcast educational and interesting, I invite you to subscribe to this channel, like and activate the notification bell so that YouTube keeps you up to date with our new content. In turn, it helps us share this information with more people. Below in the description, you will find the link to this article, as well as the link to our social networks, so you can follow us there. Thank you and see you next time.